remember the morning everything changed. My son was 4 years old, sitting on the floor of our hallway, working on his shoe. One Velcro strap, then the other. He was so focused, tongue pressed to his upper lip the way it always does when he concentrates on something that matters to him. And I was standing over him, coat already on, bag already over my shoulder, saying it. "Hurry up, come on, we're going to be late. Hurry up." He looked up at me, and something in his face shifted. Not frustration, not defiance. Something quieter, like a door, slowly closing. I think about that look more than I used to. By the end of this video, you'll understand one idea from French developmental culture that changed how I think about mornings, meals, and transitions with my children. It comes from real neuroscience, and it comes down to a single shift in how you speak that you can try tonight before bedtime. Not a philosophy overhaul, not a new routine. One shift, and it costs you nothing except about 10 seconds of awareness. The idea comes from France, and specifically from a French pediatrician named Catherine Gueguen. Her book For a Happy Childhood, published over a decade ago and still widely read in French schools and pediatric practices, drew on research from INSERM, France's National Institute for Health and Medical Research, to make an argument that French parents received not as a parenting trend, but as biology. Her core finding, the stress response in a young child's brain is not simply a smaller version of an adult's, it is disproportionate in a way most of us have never been told. A flash of urgency that barely registers in a grown-up can flood a 3-year-old's nervous system with cortisol in a way that takes 20 minutes or more to fully clear. 20 minutes. For a single, hurry up. When that happens 3 or 4 times before 9 in the morning, which is most mornings in most households including mine, the child is not learning to be faster. They're learning that their body's internal signals are obstacles, that the way they naturally move through time is a problem to be corrected rather than a signal to be respected. There is a French concept for all of this called le rythme. The word translates simply as rhythm. But in French developmental thinking, le rythme carries more weight than that translation suggests. It refers to the internal tempo a child generates naturally through their attention cycles, their digestion, their motor development, their emotional processing. French early childhood educators speak about le rythme the way a musician speaks about timing. It is not arbitrary. It is not laziness dressed up in philosophy. It is structural. A child who is given their rhythm is, in this framework, a child who is being respected at the neurological level. What surprised me when I first came across this, and I'll be honest, it took me real time to absorb, is that le rythme is not something a child chooses or controls. A 4-year-old who takes 5 minutes to put on a single shoe is not being slow as a personality trait. They are working at the motor planning speed of a 4-year-old with a prefrontal cortex that is still in early formation. You cannot rush that development any more than you can rush a bone from growing. The neurology is not negotiable, no matter how many times you say, "Come on." Most people assume that consistent exposure to urgency teaches a child to move faster over time. The research suggests the opposite. A 2019 study published in Developmental Psychobiology found that children who experienced frequent cortisol spikes from environmental pressure in their first 5 years showed measurably reduced self-regulation capacity at age 7, not worse behavior from permissiveness or inconsistency. Worse executive function, specifically reduced capacity to plan, sequence, and self-direct, from being chronically hurried. These children had not learned to manage time. They had learned to feel unsafe inside it. What's most striking about that finding is not the outcome, but what caused it. The cortisol spike from a parent saying, "Hurry up," is not triggered by the words themselves. It's triggered by tone, by posture, by the discontinuity between what the child was absorbed in and what the adult is now demanding. Even a gently spoken, "Come on, we need to go," carries a frequency that a child's nervous system registers before their conscious mind has processed the words. The body hears urgency before the ears do. So what do French families actually do differently in practice? Because this cannot simply be about saying fewer words or softening your voice. There has to be something concrete that changes the experience for the child. There is. And it's almost offensively simple the first time you hear it. It's called narrating time. Instead of pressuring the child toward an outcome, you describe what's happening around them. Instead of hurry up, you say, the bread is almost warm. Instead of, come on, we're late, you say, we have about 3 minutes and then we put our shoes on together. Instead of, stop dawdling, let's go, you say, I can see you're still thinking about that. We'll have time to come back to it. You're not removing the structure of the morning. You're changing how time is communicated inside it. This is not just gentler language, it does something structurally different in the brain. When you narrate time, when you describe what's happening rather than demand what should be happening, you give the child's nervous system information rather than a threat signal. The brain processes information and threat through entirely different pathways. Information can be integrated, considered, acted upon. Threat activates the amygdala and shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which is exactly the part of the brain the child needs to actually comply with what you're asking. When you say, hurry up, you're neurologically disabling the part of your child's brain that would help them move faster. Catherine Gueguen describes what she calls the window of calm, a brief moment, sometimes only 10 seconds long, between when a child first begins to feel rushed and when their stress response fully activates. If a parent can reach the child in that window with warmth and description rather than pressure, the cortisol spike doesn't happen. The child stays regulated. The transition proceeds, and often more smoothly than if the pressure had been applied. 10 seconds. That is the entire technique. There's a companion idea from Italian family culture that connects to this called il tempo giusto, the right time, not clock time, not scheduled time. The biological moment at which a thing is ready, including a child. You see this philosophy in the structure of le goûter, the French afternoon snack that happens at the same time each day, not because the clock arbitrarily says 4 o'clock, but because a child's body arrives at hunger around 4 o'clock and deserves to be met there by the rhythm of the household rather than made to wait or rush forward. The daily structure bends gently around the child's biology rather than requiring the child to bend around it. When I first sat with this idea, I felt genuine resistance. We have buses and school bells and work calls. There are pickup times and after-school classes and the simple math of distance and traffic. The world does not hold still for a child tying shoes. But the distinction that French and Italian families seem to carry, and that I've slowly tried to hold myself, is this. Le rythme does not mean ignoring the clock. It means not weaponizing it. The structure of the day can exist without urgency running like a current through every transition inside it. The hardest part for me was the morning, specifically that shoe moment, that specific hallway moment. Because when you're already coat on with the car warming in the driveway, and your 4-year-old is on the floor with one Velcro strap undone and the other still flat, the 10-second window feels entirely theoretical. What changed things for me practically was a concept French families call le temps de préparation, preparation time. Not getting ready time, preparation time. You begin the transition 15 minutes earlier than you technically need to, not to rush faster, but to have room not to rush at all. The extra time is not used for efficiency. It is used to let the child move at their own pace inside a window that is wide enough to contain it. The first week I tried this, it felt wasteful. We were fully dressed and coated and standing at 7:40 for a 7:55 departure. We stood in the hallway. My son put on his shoes. Slowly. And then he asked if the cat could come to school with him. I said no. But I said it without any pressure behind it, without the weight of a countdown underneath my voice. He accepted it, and we left on time, and nobody cried, and the morning felt, inexplicably, like it had more space in it than it did the week before. That is a small thing. And also, it was genuinely not small at all. There is a passage in Gueguen's writing that has stayed with me since I first read it. She describes the transition from being held to being set down as the infant's very first experience of le rythme, the earliest moment in a human life of either being followed or being rushed. When a parent responds to the baby's signal rather than to a schedule, the baby learns that their internal experience matters, that what they feel is trustworthy information about themselves. Gueguen argues that this first lesson about time, am I followed or am I hurried, becomes a deep template that shapes how a person relates to their own body's signals for years, possibly decades afterward. Put yourself in that for a moment. If every time you became genuinely absorbed in something, someone interrupted you and told you to move faster, you would eventually stop trusting your own attention. You would stop going deep into things. You would learn to stay at the surface because depth gets interrupted anyway, and the interruption is painful. You would develop a relationship with your own focus that is anxious rather than trusting. That is what chronic rushing teaches a child, not speed, shallowness of attention, distrust of their own inner signals. What strikes me about all of this research is that it reframes the central question. We tend to treat a slow child as a compliance problem. They are not moving at our pace is reasonable, so the task is to adjust them. The French developmental framework quietly inverts this. The question is not how to make the child keep up with the morning. It is how we designed a morning that requires keeping up from someone whose nervous system is a decade away from full development. That is not a judgment on any parent. It is a design question, and design questions have practical answers. I'll say the part that usually earns some pushback. I think the constant hurrying we impose on children is more about adult anxiety than about any real requirement of the clock. The urgency we pour into morning transitions is not always about buses. It's often about our own discomfort with unoptimized time, with slowness that looks like nothing is happening, with a pace that doesn't feel productive. And the child becomes the container for that anxiety again and again until they either comply by gradually disconnecting from their own natural pace, which is the bad outcome, or resist by escalating their slowness as the only territory they can control. Neither is what we want from them or for them. I want to ask you something genuinely. When was the last time you let a transition happen at your child's full natural speed without narrating the clock at them in any form? Not as a test, not rhetorically. Just honestly think back across the last week. Because I think most of us, if we're being truthful, cannot remember it clearly. Not because we are bad parents, but because we have simply stopped having the structural room for it. The good news is concrete. Researchers at Harvard's Center on the Developing Child have documented that what they call serve and return interactions, the moments where a parent follows a child's lead rather than redirecting or accelerating it, are most neurologically formative not during dedicated playtime, but during transitions. Mornings, bedtimes, the moment of getting into the car. The ordinary threshold moments we've been treating as logistical obstacles to get through are, in the developmental literature, among the most formative exchanges we have with our children each day. If this is landing for you, if you're thinking of one specific moment with your child where this might have looked and felt different, drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what your version of the shoe moment looks like, because I think most parents have one, even if they've never named it. What I keep returning to is something Gueguen said in an interview about why French families invest so heavily in unhurried transitions. She said, "A child who is given their rhythm is a child who learns that they are worth time, and a child who knows they are worth time, whose pace, whose absorption, whose slowness is treated not as a problem to solve, but as a signal to respect, becomes an adult who can sit with things, who can think deeply, who doesn't need to be always accelerating to feel safe in the world. That seems worth 15 minutes in a hallway with a Velcro strap. If this reached you, share it with one other parent who might be in their own version of that morning." Next time, we go deeper into la pause, the French practice of structured quiet that builds emotional regulation before age 5, and why it's the opposite of what most of us were taught to do when a child is upset. Until then, take the time. It's already there if you stop filling it with urgency.